Hey Treasure History! Congratulations on finishing another unit of history class. You're done with Unit 2, and today you're beginning Unit 3 about ancient Egypt. Egypt today is a country in northern Africa, and back in the BC times, it was located in the same spot, right beneath south of the Mediterranean Sea, and just to the west of the Middle East. Today, Egypt has some similarities with African culture in the regions around it, but it also has a lot culturally in common with the Middle East. And when people talk about Egypt, even though it's on the continent of Africa, people mostly today associate it with the culture of this region here. So because of that, Egypt has a lot in common with Mesopotamia, even though they are different continents from each other. Technically, they're still very close geographically. So these two places have some things in common that you'll already know about. They both have a polytheistic religion. They're both really complex with a lot of innovations and advancements in farming. They both are located on important rivers. Egypt is located on the Nile River, and they're both located in the area that we call the Middle East. So let's start learning about Egypt. Today's essential question is, how did civilization in Egypt begin? Please pause your video and copy this question at the top of your notebook. All right, please draw your vertical line for your notes. We know that the most important river for Egyptians is the Nile. It still is the same today. This is the Nile River today, with providing opportunities for travel, with settlements next to the river. Just like it is today, it was back then as well. Besides being super important for Egyptian life, the Nile is also a really unique river. It is the longest river in the world. As you can see, it stretches all the way from the Mediterranean Sea in the north down to the middle of Africa. Compare this to the Mississippi. Mississippi River also runs all the way down the United States to end in New Orleans. The Mississippi is 2,300 miles long. The Nile is 4,200 miles long. So it's almost twice the length of the Mississippi. Crazy. The other crazy thing about the Nile is that it actually runs from south to north. So the water moves this way, and it dumps out into the Mediterranean Sea. There would be no life in Egypt as we knew it if not for the Nile River. As you can see, Egypt and the rest of the Middle East is covered with deserts. Deserts over here, deserts over here, but the green area is the area that people were able to use for farming and sustained life. So in your notebook, I want you to try to copy this map of ancient Egypt. I don't think it's going to be perfect, that's okay, but I do want you to do the outline of ancient Egypt, make this kind of shape, and I want you to draw the river running vertically up ancient Egypt. At the top, go ahead and do this little triangle shape, which is called a delta. Go ahead and pause your video to copy the map. All right, let's talk about the type of land that you can find in Egypt, and then we will put this land on your map. Underneath your map, please copy your first central idea, black land. Black land is the rich, fertile soil next to the Nile River. Again, this fertile soil was only found right next to the river, and it was really only about 12 miles wide on either side. This is the only place where Egyptians could farm. Underneath that, let's do the opposite of black land, the red land. The red land was dry, barren desert. It was impossible to farm on this land because there was not enough fresh water and there was nothing to fertilize the soil. But even though there were some disadvantages to the red land, being that you could not live on it, there was also an advantage. It was great protection from enemies. It was too hard to cross the long distances of desert because people who wanted to attack or invade Egypt couldn't get there easily. They would get thirsty or they would get hot, and it wouldn't be worth it. People would not make the trip. This is what the Red Land would look like. Again, not easy to cross. Great protection. That's why Egypt never got invaded until very late in its history. Back to your map on the top of your notes. I want you to shade in the area right around the Nile River. So you're going to maybe draw that outline, but then color it in and label that the black land. Remember, this is the area that was good for what? Now label the delta. This was the most fertile land of all. There was the most water and the most fertile soil. This is the part that emptied right into the Mediterranean Sea. And last, I want you to label the red land. Remember that the red land was an advantage because why? All right. Please go ahead and label the names of the deserts in the red land. We have the Western Desert on the west side of the Nile, and over here, close to the Arabian Peninsula, we have the Arabian Desert. Important bodies of water in Egypt were the Red Sea to the east. Remember, Mesopotamia was just across the Red Sea over here. And up north, we have the Mediterranean Sea. Remember that the Nile runs north and empties into the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean Sea was also important for trade. Once Egyptians got good at using boats to travel, there were all sorts of colonies along the Mediterranean, and even Mesopotamia over here, where people could go to trade with other civilizations. Okay, press pause if you need more time to copy, but you should have all of these things on your map now. Remember this word delta? I forget, what does that mean again? All right, so as civilization began in Egypt, there were two different areas where people began to settle the most. People began to farm in the southern part of the Nile and in the northern part of the Nile in the delta. But because the Nile runs from south to north, we label these the opposite of what you might think. The top one is called Lower Egypt. The bottom one is called Upper Egypt. I know that seems crazy, but do you remember why we call it like that? Okay, so in these two separate settlement areas, two separate governments began to form. These two settlements shared a culture and a religion, but they could not get along. They bickered and fought like brother and sister. After thousands of years, though, they had a king who could bridge their differences. His name was King Menes. Here's King Menes, also called Narmer, King Narmer sometimes, same guy. He unified the two regions of Egypt and took for himself all the power as monarch over both regions. Now we're going to read about the story of King Menes, and we're going to figure out exactly what it was like when he took power and formed the country that today we call Egypt. No more Upper Egypt, no more Lower Egypt, just Egypt. And this is the unified civilization that we'll be learning about in Unit 3. Go ahead and return to your playlist so we can read about King Menes or King Narmer.